What's up, y'all? My name is Brian Ng, and I am a professional paleo artist. That means I work with paleontologists to reconstruct what we think prehistoric animals might have looked like based on the latest fossil evidence and the latest evidence from the living world. Now today, in this video, I'm going to show you how to piece together a life-size Struthiomimus dinosaur skull puppet. Now, you can get a pattern for building this puppet off of my website, don'tmesswithdinosaurs.com. I'll put the link in the description below. It's a simple paper pattern, which what you'll do is you'll print out the paper pattern, stick it on a piece of cardboard, and cut out all the pieces you need in order to build a life-size puppet like this one. Now, this pattern is actually based on a real fossil. Right here, I have a cast of the skull of an actual Struthiomimus. This was an ostrich-like dinosaur that lived right at the end of the age of dinosaurs in the late Cretaceous period. And this is a cast of the actual skull from Triceratops Paleontology Incorporated. Big shout outs to Anthony Maltese, the paleontologist at Triceratops, who gave me this skull cast to do science education and outreach with. What I did was I made a paper pattern off of that, and then from that paper pattern I made this prototype puppet. And then from there I made a refined pattern, which you can now download, and I'll show you how to put together in this video. What you'll need for this art project is a piece of cardboard. At least this big is good. A little bigger is better because that gives you some more real estate to work with on the cardboard. Cardboard has these corrugations in it, and it likes to bend along those corrugations. On my pattern, I've actually put in lines which indicate the best direction to have those corrugations go through that part of the pattern. So if you lay this pattern on the cardboard so that those lines line up with the corrugations, it'll make putting the puppet together a lot easier, because then the cardboard it won't be fighting you, it'll be bending in the direction you want. So as you can see, I've already cut out all the parts of my puppet, so go ahead and download the PDF, get your tools and materials together, and then I'll show you how to piece it all together. The only other things you're going to need are some tape, some glue, and some cutting tools. I used hot glue to glue down my pattern to the cardboard. You can use pretty much any kind of glue. Some will take longer to cure. I like quality masking tape, but if you don't have that, Scotch tape will work, packaging tape will work, pretty much any tape that sticks well to paper products. And then your cutting tools. You can do this whole project with a basic pair of craft scissors. You can also use, I like to use a utility knife or an X-Acto knife, but if you're a younger artist or if you're just clumsy like I can be sometimes, maybe don't use that. The last thing we need right now is anybody going to the ER behind building dinosaur puppets. That's just not worth it. A great tool for getting into some of these harder to cut spots in the puppet is a pair of cuticle scissors. You can even get blunt ones if you want to be really safe. And these are great for getting inside of little tight areas like this dorsotemporal fenestra. And also you can like trim off little pieces of stuff that are just kind of hanging up on your puppet. These are really great for pretty much artists of any ages. And yeah, I just want to say, be careful as you're cutting. Always follow the key rules of cutting. Never cut towards a body part. Never try and push a blade through material that your body part is on the other side of. It's really easy to misjudge where your fingers are and cut yourself, or to have the blade slip and then cut like people can cut themselves really, really bad that way. So be really careful. Go get your pieces, go get your pattern downloaded, stuck on the cardboard, cut out, and then meet me back at this video. You can either pause it, or I'll put the time code where I'll start piecing this thing together in the description below. Okay, I hope you still have all of your fingers and toes, because now you're going to need them to put this skull together. The thing we're going to start with is the bottom mouth plate and the top mouth plate. And we're going to quickly turn these in to the foundation of every simple hand puppet. We're going to put them together like this, and we're going to take a couple pieces of tape. We're going to match up these corners, this back corner right here, And we're just going to simply wrap that tape around that flat edge. We're going to do that to both sides. We're going to try and center it up as well as we can. I actually got mine a little off center, so I'm going to retape it. Once we've got these like this, we've got a simple hinge. I'm going to reinforce this on this side because that'll just make it work better, make it last longer. And it'll make sure there's not like a gross sticky piece of tape in that corner of the mouth. And now we're ready to attach our hand straps. Now in the downloadable pattern, there's these two pieces, one for the thumb strap, one for the hand strap. These aren't precisely measured. You're gonna have to adjust these based on your individual hands. Now, in my case, I might need a little more material because, you know, my hand is kind of big. Okay, so I just cut a longer piece of cardboard, a longer strip, and I'm just gonna make sure the edges on that, the angle works with the angle of the top mouth plate. Now I need to make sure to give myself a little extra slack, like so that I have enough room for my hand to go through. A handy trick is to just kind of bend this over your hand, and then if you can slide your hand out while holding a piece of cardboard in place. Sometimes you can even put a little piece of tape there to hold it exactly where it should be. And now you just have to trim off the excess on the bottom here. That should be pretty good. Okay, always careful when we cut. So one thing that works really well is to, wherever possible, wrap tape around corners. That'll make a much stronger bond. And we want this spot where our hand goes to be nice and sturdy. We don't want a lot of wiggle in that. We want that to be taped on really securely. If you're using hot glue, this is a great spot to put some hot glue in the corner there and really reinforce that connection. Because every time you open the puppet's mouth, that joint is going to be strained a little bit. It's going to stretch that joint just a little bit. So you want to try and get tape into all of these little nooks and crannies and really reinforce that joint. Okay, so we got that one. So now we've got the beginnings of a puppet. We just need that thumb strap. So I tend to puppeteer with my right hand. So the important thing is that the thumb strap is tight over my right thumb. I'm going to hold the puppet over my thumb like this. I'm going to bend up my piece of cardboard. I'm going to just get a good idea of where it needs to go. So I'm going to put it at, it's going to be at a kind of a funny angle for me. See that? I'm kind of going diagonally from my thumb across to the other side, so it's nice and snug around that joint of my thumb. That'll keep it from sliding out. Now I'm going to try and stick this in place without displacing it too much. Okay, so we now have the basis of our entire puppet, the hand strap. It's working pretty decently. It's pretty snug. It's a little bit uncomfortable because of that cardboardy edge. So I'm just going to take some tape and wrap it around that edge and kind of squish it down. Knock down some of that paper cutty edge and make it a lot more comfortable. Just a little piece of tape right there. It makes a world of difference. All right, the next step in this process is to attach the lower jaws. So the lower jaws have this funny tab sticking off of the side. And part of the reason I have those corrugation suggestions, the direction for corrugation to run, well, that puts it right in this bend spot for this funny tab. So what we're trying to do is bring that tab, fold it to the side, sort of fold it so that it's pointing toward the middle of the animal, and then we're going to make a bend in the cardboard there so that that tab touches the base of the jaw. And then we're going to tape that in place. And what that's going to do is create a nice strong corner in the back of our jaw. It's going to make the jaw a lot more sturdy. And it's also simulating an actual muscle attachment point on the back of the Struthiomimus's jaw. This muscle attachment point right here is what we're building. And that's important for a biomechanical reason. That back part of the jaw is where the muscles that actually open the jaw are. The jaw hinges here, and the muscles that open the jaw attach behind it. So when those muscles pull up, the jaw opens. This hole right here is where a bunch of the muscles that close the jaw attach. So the hinge right here, if those muscles pull up, the jaw wants to close. And you'll be able to see that even more clearly when the whole puppet is put together. So once we've got that corner built in, the other thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of bend this down the midline. We're going to kind of fold it like a hot dog bun all the way down. And that's going to give it a much more natural curvature, just like the real jaws of these animals. They kind of bulge out in that way. This one's kind of flattened from being crushed in the earth for millions of years, but they have sort of a rounded profile if you look at them from the front. So we're going to do that the other jaw as well. Again, we're going to bend along that bend point, and then we're going to fold that over, and then we're going to put a piece of tape to hold that in place. Boom. Alright, so we're reinforcing that corner. And we're going to just kind of bend. You can kind of bend that corner a little bit just to round things off. You know, animals don't have a lot of right angles in them. And again, we're going to kind of crunch that cardboard, kind of fold it like a hot dog bun all the way down the end. And it'll give the lower jaw a much more naturalistic shape and profile. Okay, so we've now got two sides of the lower jaw. What we want to do now is actually, we're going to join them in the middle, but we're going to join them around the bottom mouth plate. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to line up this lower jaw on the bottom mouth plate. And what I want is I want the jaw joint in the back here to line up approximately with the artificial joint that we've made for our puppet mouth plate. So we're going to kind of line that up, and then I'm going to line it up front. I'm going to kind of bend this front part of the beak around so that it lines up, boom, with the tip of the bill here. And then, once again, I'm going to use some tape and tape that in place. Now, again, you could do all of this with hot glue. I like the masking tape because it's quicker for this demonstration. But if you wanted to preserve the drawing detail on the outside, you could tack all this in place with hot glue. It might take a bit longer though. So now that I've got that piece in place, I'm also going to adjust things a little bit back here. I want that lower jaw. I don't want the jaw to go higher than that jaw joint. Otherwise it'll interfere with the skull above it. So while I'm at it, I'm going to take a piece of tape. I'm going to wrap from that spot in that hole in the jaw where the jaw muscles go in. It's one of the things that's nice about cutting these holes into things is they actually do give you nice attachment points for putting the puppet together. And then I'm wrapping tightly to the spot where I really want it to stay. I don't want it riding further than that. And you'll see that when you do that, there's this rim inside, this inner ridge that kind of makes the inside ridge of the beak. And what you can do when you've got those main points in place is you can kind of shove some tape in there or some hot glue and reinforce that. So I'm going to take this tape and I'm just going to kind of like lay it into that crevice. I don't know how well you can see that on camera, but I'm just going to kind of push that in there. Boom. Alright, so that's pretty well reinforced. Now we're going to take this other piece of the lower jaw, we're going to do the same thing. This time, when we attach it, we're going to attach it both to the jaw plate and to the other jaw on the other side. And because of the flatness of the cardboard, I'm going to have to kind of like break over this edge and give it that more natural rounded look to the front. I'm kind of pinching that so that it can wrap around this edge and match up really nicely with that other piece. Okay. Alright, so now I'm doing the same thing, but I'm wrapping the tape around this other piece. So we're joining those two beak parts right together at the front. And I'm going to get a wider piece of tape now and do that over a broader area so there's a nice strong joint there. And I took too long of a piece of tape. And again, wrapping around edges where possible. If the tape wraps all the way around the corner, it'll hold things together a lot better than if it's just stuck on a flat surface, going one flat surface to another. Okay, so I went ahead and I cut another piece of triangular cardboard, basically the same shape as the mouth floor plate, and I just glued that in and taped that in for added stability. That's not in the pattern, but it's one of the things you can do to make your puppet just last a little bit longer. Basically just duplicate that floor plate and make two of them. So a real animal wouldn't actually have any bone in here. There would be jaw muscles reinforcing this. This is actually where the tongue and a thing called the gular pouch would be. There's a pouch underneath here. And that's part of the reason I put this hole in the bottom of the lower jaw. Because when this is all put together, our puppet should be able to eat small objects. Although that was its own scleral ring, so we don't have it eating those. Okay, so we're now ready to attach the upper skull. And the way that we're going to do that is by lining it up again with that front tip of the snout and looking for where that jaw joint goes. And there's this piece on the back corner here that we're going to bend in and wrap around just like we did with the lower jaw. And that'll give this back corner of the puppet a lot more sturdiness and stability, which will help it last longer. And it'll also reflect the actual shape of the skull a bit better. It's kind of amazing when building these puppets based on real animals, very often the structures that the real animals have in their skulls and in their limbs are amazingly well designed and have multiple functions kind of built into them. So by reinforcing this corner here, we're basically doing something that the skull is doing naturally. It's reinforcing that jaw joint. And we're basically doing it the same way. We're folding more material into that little area. Okay, so that's reinforced there. I'm going to grab my other one. I'm going to just do the same thing there so that they're about the same. I'm going to bend that around. I'm going to pull that into that corner. I'm actually going to, again, I'm going to kind of trim the corner out of this one again. So it gives it a bit of a rounder shape when it folds it over. See how that just, let's make sure we get that on that camera really good. So that's going to grab onto the bottom of the skull. A huge piece of tape for that, just a little one will do. And again, wrapping around corners with tape makes a stronger joint because it puts everything under tension. So now what we're going to do is just like we did with the bottom jaw, we're going to take a bit of tape and we're going to wrap around the front of that snout. And what we're going to look for is these areas where it actually narrows in the skull roof. There's this narrow spot up towards the snout, and that's actually going to be the first spot where we put a substantial amount of tape. Anywhere that it narrows, we want to tape really hard so that it holds that narrow spot. It forces this outer chunk of the skull to bend inward there. And again, this is where if you line up those corrugations, they'll work to your benefit right now when we're bending this side view of the skull around the mouth plate. Okay, so again, we've got a narrow part right here, just below the eye, kind of below and in front of the eye, and we're going to take some tape and we're going to wrap tightly into that narrow spot so that it forces this skull profile view to bend around the mouth plate. and that'll give it a really naturalistic look. And if we lined it up correctly, that reinforced corner of the lower jaw will lock nicely into that reinforced corner of the upper jaw. That's how we know we're on the right track with this piece so far. Okay, there we go. The upper and lower jaws weren't quite going where I wanted them to, but then I just bent the mouth plate down a little bit in the front. And things are now meshing really nicely in the front. We got them meshing nicely in the back. So then what I'll go and do is add more tape to really keep everything in alignment all the way down the length of the skull. And what you'll find is that inside the mouth here, there's this ridge coming down for where the beak would have been. And that's what we want. And that'll actually, it works really well with the puppet. Like, you can actually pick things up with this because of that ridge. Just like the living animal would have been able to pick things up with the ridge of its beak. And I'm going to now take this front part of the nose, and I'm going to wrap around it tightly so that it wraps around the front part of the mouth plate and gives it that nice natural curve around the front of the nose. We're going to come through and do the other side of the upper jaw now. And we're basically going to do exactly what we did with the lower jaw, except we've got this handy dandy bar of bone in the nose, and that's going to help us out. I'm going to wrap around that a bunch of times because it really ties things together nicely. I'm going to line things up here. I'm going to look for that jaw joint in the corner. I would really like to get that to line up nicely again as it did on the other side. I guess I have to slide back a little more. Once again, I'm going to move down the line from the front to the back, taping the hardest where there's areas where we want the ridge of the beak to narrow up. So again, wrapping around corners with the tape to get good strong bonds, and then just wrapping really hard in the spots where we want the snout to be narrower. Okay, so we are making good progress here, just reinforcing that mouth ridge with a bead of hot glue, being careful not to burn my fingers. Again, avoiding injury in these hectic times. Seaming a little tape in there just to hold everything in place. And now we are almost done. But there's a couple more steps, and we're getting into the most challenging part of this build, which is actually folding up the skull roof, which is the most complicated part. But before we do that, we're going to take and we're going to just crunch in the back of this whole skull. We're going to roll everything toward the midline. As you can see with this guy's skull, everything in the back comes to a round, almost like a butt in the back, because he has this really large brain case. One of the cool things about ornithomimid dinosaurs like Struthiomimus is they have some of the largest brains of any of the non-bird dinosaurs. So we really want to fold in that back of that skull so it gets that nice bulgy round brain case shape. Now, as we move from front to back, or back to front, whichever, there's these little notches that we cut out, and we're going to use tape and we're going to join those together so that each one of those spots closes down, and that's going to add to the rounded shape of the skull. So I think the easiest way to do this is to put a piece of tape on the front tab, push the two tabs together, push that tape over the one you just pushed in place, do that all the way down, and then reinforce it on the inside. I'm going to just do a dab of hot glue here, and then a piece of tape reinforcing that. So now on this side, we have this nice rounded form. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. Close the gap between them, shove your thumb forward to kind of mash that tape onto the next segment, and then wrap it all around. Squish everything inward. Okay, now that we've got that rounded dome in the back, we're going to close these seams together just along the very back edge. Basically this corner where it comes together. We're going to just join those two edges. And another piece of tape over that. And that'll give us a nice, good bond So now we're almost there. We've got most of the skull, but we're on to the hardest part, which is this crazy brain case. As you can see on this skull, there's a lot of lumps and bumps. And so I tried to create a pattern which, if you put all these pieces together the right way, it simulates that lumpy, bumpy, big brain case in the back of the ornithomimid skull. I think it's a really cool feature of these guys that they had pretty large brains for a non-bird dinosaur. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna really bend up this piece of cardboard, flexing everything toward the midline and toward the front. And we're gonna just break it over. And I've already broken it over a little bit. And what's gonna happen is when we put it on top of this skull, we're gonna try and line up a couple things. First of all, we're gonna try and line up these bumps that are coming out the side. Those are the front of the eyebrow attachment point. Those are actually on the skull here. There's this bump that comes out where a ligament that attaches the eyebrow runs over the top of the eye to this other bump back here. I tried to include that on this puppet reconstruction in case down the line we want to convert these into fleshed out reconstructions. We can use those bumps to reconstruct a pretty realistic version of the ornithomimid eye. So I'm going to line those up. I'm going to try and get that to bend over correctly. And then I'm going to kind of pull the roof of my skull down and forward. And I'm going to try to line up this back part of the skull roof should go basically right behind the orbit of the eye and link up with this other little tab that's from on top. This is the trickiest part of this build. So what we're going to do is tape this from back to front. I'm going to be closing each of these gaps as I go. I'm going to need a bunch of kind of smaller pieces of tape for this. So where I have a gap, I'm going to close it, and then I'm going to push a piece of tape there. Then we have this gap. We want to join this little tab. Should notch in to this thing behind it as well as we can. This little point sticking out should remain sticking out. That's supposed to be part of the eyebrow. But this little tab, let's see, can we get that on camera? Okay, so that little tab should fold in right there. And actually, I'm going to bend this in a little bit so that it really, I'm going to bend this one out. All right, so then that's going to grab in something like that. And we're going to do our best. It's not going to be perfect because this is just a paper craft sculpture. I don't know if you can see that. I'm going to wrap that there. And then I'm going to get another little piece of tape. And I'm going to just close up all these gaps. As we do this, we should start to get some bumps and bulges in the skull. I'm also going to kind of bend it hot dog-like, but towards the outside, in the middle, to try and get some of that skull bumpiness that the actual skull has. I'm going to take that, I'm going to bend that down. I'm really kind of beating up the cardboard in the back part of the skull in order to get it to curve and swerve more and not have such sharp angular cuts. Okay, so once again, closing up gaps, marrying those edges to each other. And that little tab out, I want that stuff to go in. Oh, well, you can see that. Okay, so we're starting to get the two bumps of the brain case that we have on top of the skull here. So we're trying to get that bumpy structure, those two big bumps. Closing that down, grabbing that onto there. So then, if it all goes well, you should get those two, it almost looks like a chest plate for armor or something when you piece it all together. Okay, once you've got that in place, we're gonna pop that on top of the skull. We're gonna line up these two tabs at the front of the eyebrow. That's a key spot. And while that's kind of lined up, I'm going to wrap some tape around the tip of the snout. where it layers over the snout bones from the lower part of the skull. Just gonna wrap that around there, wrap that around really good there, kind of crush that down. Now that we got that in place, now we can start to try and line things up in the back of the skull. And what's gonna happen is we're gonna tape down this stuff in the front of the skull. And when we do that, we're then gonna push up the back of the skull, and that's gonna give it just that little bit of a bulge like he has in the back of his head, where his big old ornithomimid brain is. So again, we're gonna tape hard where we want things to narrow up. We've got kind of a narrow spot in the midline of the snout here, so we're gonna tape hard on that. Give me that piece of paper there. Okay, cool. All right, and then we're gonna just go down the line. I'm gonna kind of tuck the lower skull under this upper skull part. In part because that's how the anatomy works, but it also just holds everything together that way. Take this, I'm gonna slap it on top here. I'm gonna push these under, wrap the tape real tight. There, we want to create a nice strong bond, because as we deform the back of the skull, we want everything up front to have a nice firm grip so that nothing comes undone as we're pushing the back of the skull in place. Okay, so now what we're going to do, we want it to kind of widen out a little bit where these eyebrow things stick out. We want it to kind of widen out, because if you look at the top of the skull, it flares out right here where those eyebrows are. See how it flares out? We want it to flare out just like that. So what we're gonna do, and this is again where hot glue is kind of like the best option, but you can do it with tape. So what I'm gonna do with tape is I'm gonna actually take a piece of tape and I'm gonna go inside the skull. I'm going to stick it to the inner wall of the orbit there, and then I'm going to stick it to the roof underneath. Now, you can reinforce this from the outside with tape. I'm going to do it with hot glue and tape, because I want this one to hold up. Okay, so now what we're going to do, in this back part of the skull, we've got these little tabs flaring out to the side. You're like, ugh, what are those? Well, what those are is these funny little protuberances coming off of the back part of the orbit. Those are kind of important because, again, those are muscle attachments or ligament attachment points for the soft tissue parts of the eyebrow. So if we were to make a soft tissue reconstruction on the skull, we'd want to make sure we know where those landmarks are. So what we're going to do, as best we can, is push that tab, that little thing sticking out, to approximately where it should be on the actual skull, which is just basically at the back of the orbit. I'm going to basically try and push that right to the edge of the orbit. And as we do so, you'll see that it kind of bumps up the top of the skull. It kind of pushes it up and gives it that funny domed shape. There's these holes on the back of the skull in the top where the jaw muscles go through, and I accidentally covered them over, and so I'm surgically taking my puppet apart again. And what we're going to do is we're going to crunch this whole back of the skull up and reveal that dorsotemporal fenestra. That's a hole where jaw muscles went down into the lower jaw, and those jaw muscles would kind of stream forward, and when they pulled up on the jaw, they would close it. And yeah, I just accidentally forgot that I was trying to keep that exposed. Okay, so we're going to crunch that back part of the skull up. We're going to hold it in place behind the orbit, and we're going to expose this hole called the dorsotemporal fenestra. And I'm going to put my scissors through there to shove the tape through. Okay, so as a final touch, I popped in those scleral rings. Scleral rings are these weird rings of bone that the iris muscles attach to in many birds and other animals. A lot of reptiles have them. So one of the other fun details to look at is in the roof of the mouth. Those two big holes at the back, those are where jaw muscles would have descended from the top of the skull, where we have the dorsotemporal fenestra and the temporal fenestra. There would have been jaw muscles running down there through those holes in the roof of the mouth and connecting into various jaw muscle attachment points in the jaw here. So those muscles, when they ran through here and pulled up on the jaw, they would close the jaw. Whereas this muscle attachment point in the back right here, this is where if the muscles pulled up, it would actually open the jaw. Now the muscle attachments here, in pretty much all dinosaurs and crocodilians, are much, much weaker than the jaw muscles that attach into these multiple holes in the back of the skull and then run and connect down into these various jaw muscle attachments all along the jaw here. They don't have real powerful muscles for opening their jaws. They invest all that strength into clamping them shut. That's part of the reason why you can close a crocodile's jaws with your hands or keep it closed with duct tape. I don't recommend you do it, but that's the biomechanics behind it. Now, as you can see, compared to something like Tyrannosaurus rex, there's not a huge amount of jaw muscle attachment space back here. These guys were investing more in their brains. They also don't have teeth, but they have these little pores emerging from the bone. All those little pores that came through the bone in the front are where blood vessels would have come through to nourish a keratinous beak. Now, keratin is the same material as your hair and fingernails. It's a lot cheaper to make than teeth. It doesn't require as many nutrients. It doesn't take as long to grow. So birds and a number of dinosaur groups and other prehistoric groups developed these keratin beaks so that they could quickly and efficiently gobble things up and eat all kinds of different food without wearing out teeth or having to invest in them at all. Thanks for watching, y'all. I hope you enjoyed this activity. If you did, like, share, subscribe, do all that good YouTube stuff. And I look forward to seeing what you create. I hope you'll post it on social media with the hashtag StruthioFlog. If this does well and a bunch of people make Struthiomimuses, then maybe we'll do an instructional on how to turn the skull reconstruction into a fleshed out reconstruction with eyes and skin and plumage and all that good stuff. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing what you create. Goodbye.